Hi, and welcome to the Choose FI Foundation's Educational Speaker Series, where we take topics from the Choose FI Foundation's pre-K through 12 financial literacy curriculum and break it down with expert speakers in the area to bring a little bit more information and ideas to the topic. Hope you enjoy it.
Hey everyone, this is Phelan. I'm here with Brian Eufinger of Edison Prep. Brian is joining us from his vacation in Florida, Brian, thank you so much for being here with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to help. I need to get in from the sun before I get sunburned, and I know we've been playing phone tag for a while, but it's such an important message, and the work that you're doing is great. So I want to get this done so we can share some good information on all these metrics, AP, SAT, ACT, IB, all the alphabet soup that is college stuff.
Yes, we're going to be talking today about college and how to get the cost of college down, and really the things that you should start thinking about while you are in high school. Let's just dive straight into this. Why is it so important to think about college while you're in high school? Let's start there.
Sure. So obviously people of all different ages will be listening to this podcast, and logic would just tell you that the longer you have to turn the Titanic, the easier things are. So if there's a freshman who's just hearing this right now, you have no semesters in the grade book yet. If you're a rising freshman, nothing you've done has been on your quote unquote permanent record. Middle school grades don't count, etc. And the world's your oyster as far as turning the ship. If you're an older student, then you can still make changes, but obviously the longer time you have, the better. As far as saving money on college, there are formal programs and there's informal programs. So there's some places that have formal merit aid grids based on some of the variables we're going to talk about later today, where basically to make things administratively easy, there might be a large state school that has tons of people and don't have time to figure out the nuance. Where if you get this and have this, then here's how much merit aid we knock off the price. Just like you're at Macy's, here's a 15% off coupon. And
it's just a straightforward formula that they take your numbers, they plug it in, and out comes your merit-based aid, whatever it is. Okay, got it.
And in other schools, it's more of a nuanced process where they look at the totality of your application, but obviously the higher stats you can have on all fronts, the better odds you have of getting merit aid in the first place and getting a larger amount of merit aid.
Okay. So when we're talking about merit aid, that's mostly to do with your academics, correct?
Correct. Now, there's what I call the big five. So there's the big five numbers that won't apply to everybody. But so there's your GPA, both weighted and unweighted. It's very important for both students and parents to ask that question: what is my weighted and what is my unweighted GPA? And then there's also SAT or ACT scores, whichever one you submit. And then there's also, most schools do either AP classes or IB. Pepsi, Coke, they're both ways of showing I'm taking rigorous classes. AP or IB, or some schools, students will take a blend of possibly some AP classes and then some dual enrollment classes as well. But IB, AP, and dual enrollment, DE, are all ways of showing that I am challenging myself with some harder classes, and they help you in the overall process to show rigor.
There's a lot of acronyms in education for sure.
There are. Sure.
Okay, so yeah, when we were talking about your grade, so freshman, point was made, you've got a blank slate. Like there is no record from middle school as to what you have done. You get to kind of say, okay, what is my GPA moving forward? And you're in full control of that. And by full control, like you have to come into this with a growth mindset that like if you want a very high GPA, it is something that you can earn and you can work for. There is no kind of like limiting belief that, oh, I'm just never going to get it, so I'm going to give up right now. Like you are in full control of this. Make sure you are working as hard as you want towards the goals that you have. And I think a common thing I see in freshmen is that they don't have any goals yet. They haven't even thought about college or what the decisions they're making in freshman year are going to do for them in the future. And you kind of end up cruising through that freshman, sophomore year, and you get to junior year and you're like, oh crap, like now I need to start really thinking about this. And you may have already done some damage to that GPA. So, I mean, how important is this GPA?
It's the number one. It is and should be the most important factor in every college application because you spend 4 years crafting it. So we're a tutoring company and we work with hundreds of kids a year, and I lose business, hundreds of clients over the years because I'll get this call from a mom, well-meaning mom, who's like, my ninth grader, and like, go away, like literally go away. Like the only thing that you should be doing freshman and sophomore year is getting as ridiculously high of a GPA as humanly possible and not putting any oopses in the grade book where you oops, I got a C- in biology and English. And that, because that it's hard to pull out from. Just like an NFL team loses the first couple games of the season, it's not impossible to get to the playoffs, but you've put yourself into a tougher situation. So if someone is having a parent who's listening to the email, show this to your mom and say, see, mom, he said, like, nobody should be working on SAT and ACT stuff, freshman year, and honestly, mostly even sophomore year, other than possibly towards the very, very end of a sophomore year, taking a practice test of each just to see which one you're better at, so that junior year you can take those tests. But freshman and sophomore year are about taking decently hard classes and getting good grades in them, and also getting involved in a couple activities that you legitimately are passionate about, not the ones that you air quotes think colleges want to see. They want to see the real you, and they don't want clones of everyone on the campus. They want you to get involved in the activities that you are passionate about.
Okay, and I kind of want to push back a little bit on what you said in sophomore year, because in sophomore year, a lot of students are going to take the PSAT. Let's throw another acronym in there. So this is the, is it pre or practice SAT? I forget what the P stands for.
PSAT.
Yeah. So this test is just a practice SAT for the most part, but there are some scholarships that can come from your PSAT score, right?
But not sophomore year. If you get a perfect score on the PSAT sophomore year, you can't tell anyone about it. It doesn't matter. The only one that matters, the one that's for all the marbles, is the junior year PSAT. It's typically the Wednesday right after Columbus Day. Now, the PSAT, and this is something that is awkward to admit, every industry has some folks who are a little more salesy than others. The PSAT, unfortunately, primarily is used as a marketing tool by a lot of companies to scare parents. Mm-hmm. In that, I'm a data nerd. I worked for a decade in corporate healthcare analytics and strategy before we started our company. I believe in numbers. And so we track data. And when we look at it, since the new SAT debuted about almost 5 years ago now, if someone did not have a cold PSAT score sophomore year, cold unstudied, of 1,300, we've seen only one kid get national merit semifinalist, even with prep, if they didn't have a cold 1,300. So if a parent gets a sophomore PSAT back and the kid has an 1110 on the sophomore PSAT, I don't feel ethical telling someone, and anything's possible, right? But realistically, in some states, because the cutoff for national merit is different in Massachusetts versus West Virginia versus whatever, in some states you can miss as few as 1 or 2 questions to get national merit semifinalists. And so for someone to go from missing 80 questions to missing 1, sure, anything's possible, but there's probably better uses of your time, extracurricular-wise or GPA-wise, if you're that low. On the other hand, if a kid has a 1340 on the sophomore PSAT and they are thinking, I'm going to go to summer camp for 11 weeks and work at Philmont and not even look at PSAT stuff, they might want to do an abbreviated version of that because it's a one-shot deal. The PSAT is a one-shot deal, and there's plenty of places, Tulsa, Alabama, there's probably 50-plus schools that you can Google online where if you put them down as your number one choice and you get national merit semifinals or finalists, they roll out the red carpet. They give you full tuition all 4 years, this and that. Here's a laptop. Here's a books credit each semester. And so it can, if someone's in that right range, obviously Harvard is not going to be doing that for you. But there are a lot of schools, not one school, there's dozens of schools who have special set-aside programs for those who can get national merit semifinalist or finalist.
Okay, so a couple of things I want to go into here. The national merit scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
This is based on PSAT scores, and it's almost like a competition. Like you get put forward based on your score. You go into like a semifinal stage, and then to a final, and then you eventually could get selected. And
Mm-hmm.
schools will care about you getting into those like semifinal, final stages, right?
Correct. Now, at schools that do not give the here's the full Monty, here's everything type treatment to you, it's an honor on par of Girl Scout Gold Award or Eagle Scout. In that, why do we think Eagle Scout's a big deal? Because it's rare. Like 0.5% of America has it. Same thing with Girl Scout Gold Award. What is rare is neat, and that's why. And there's no inflation. Like there's grade inflation out the wazoo, has been for a decade. You and I are probably around the same age. Like C's were super common in the 90s. They're not really that common anymore because like you get weighted average points for taking honors classes. Your teachers let you do makeup assignments, or even some school districts in Virginia and Iowa and elsewhere have no zeros policies where you're not allowed to give a kid a 0, even if they don't show up to class. You have to give them a 50%. Like because of all the bonkers stuff going on with grade inflation, it makes it super important to get as high as grades as possible because people have higher grades than ever, just incredibly high grades across all states, public, private, doesn't matter. But also for the ACT and for the PSAT rather, it's 16,000, the end. So the nation has grown a lot the last 30 years. 16,000 people roughly get semifinalists, the end. And so it's actually harder way harder than right now than when it was when we were in high school, because they haven't expanded the number of national merit folks. So the
Gotcha.
top 16,000 roughly get semifinalists. The next 34,000 after that get commended. And what we tell students is, don't let any guidance counselor or high school counselor tell you that commend is not a big deal. If only 50,000 people get either commended or semifinalist designation out of almost 2 million people, that's a huge deal to be in the top 50,000 of anything. So yes, it is easier to get merit money for semifinalists and finalists, but commended is nothing to, it's something you put right up there, one of the top bullet points on your resume if you get it.
Yeah, so it's definitely something worth going for. Can you give me a quick, like, for anybody who is, say, freshman, sophomore, they haven't really thought about SATs, PSATs, any of this stuff yet, like, what is a very short snapshot of how the SAT works? Like, how many points are we talking? What are the sections in the SAT, and what's considered a good score?
Sure. So the SAT, it's out of 1,600 points,
Okay.
2 800-point sections. Reading, writing is 800, and math is 800. The average fluctuates between like a 1060 and 1070 each year. So around a 530 is the average on each section. And then the ACT is 36 points, where they just take the average of all 4 section scores: English, math, reading, and science, and they round up. So if you get 22 and a half, you get 23. And so that's how the two work. So 20.5 is the average on ACT, 1060 something average on the SAT.
Awesome. So then these numbers go into, for the state schools, the big schools, this is part of that formula. So you'd have your GPA, your SAT or ACT scores. They go into that formula. They work their magic on it, whatever it is, and out comes your merit-based age. So for your academics, this is the age you would get. And then smaller schools might consider it a little bit differently.
Right. So, I mean, a lot of them just to reduce phone calls, or just in the spirit of transparency, like Auburn has a very, very publicly published merit aid grid. Michigan State does. University of Alabama Huntsville does. Ole Miss does. I mean, just the larger and the more public the school is, the more likely they are to have that. Although there's a lot of smaller liberal arts colleges that have now said that as well. Like, here's our offer. Like, if you do this, then you qualify for the trustees award, which is just knocking off X $1,000s. But yeah, so that's helpful for parents for planning versus hope and prayer. Like, I hope that Auburn gives me money. It's like, no, if you have this GPA and this test score, then you get 4,000. This and this, you get, like at Auburn, the top level is 15, right? It could change from year to year, but for the last few years, the top level has been 15,000 a year renewable for all 4 years. So $60,000 off the price tag is not nothing. And one thing we tell students to motivate them, we work with kids, you work with kids, we all know how kids operate. But once kids actually realize, let's take a hypothetical person at Auburn. If you took a person who was one ACT question below the threshold to get the bare minimum, like the $4,000 level at Auburn, how many questions out of the 215 questions on the ACT might they need to fix to go from one question below to the tippity top best in the land $15,000 a year award? Like 20. Like fixing not even 10% of the questions. Like, literally, is each one of those questions worth up to $3,000? Like, if you happen to be on that person on that precipice, for sure. And so League of Legends does not look nearly as exciting when you look at it. And that's, I mean, how many hours do you have to bag groceries at Publix versus, once kids realize that, it's like, oh wow, like, I don't like it. I'm not saying this stuff's fun to study for, but wow, yeah, maybe maybe I should work on this more than I think I should. And it's hard because no one goes and brags saying, so what did you do this weekend? I crushed 3 ACTs. We have students, they do this. They just don't brag about it. And so it can feel like if you're studying for this stuff, you're the only one studying for it. I would tell your listeners, go on Reddit or go on collegeconfidential.com or go on any some of those mom, like Grown and Flown type sites. Like, you will see, I'm not lying to you. Like, oh my gosh, there's people that are studying so hard. Either whether to get into better schools or to get merit money at the same level of schools, or both.
Yeah.
Trust me when I say there's plenty of people that are working plenty hard on this stuff. They just don't, it's not fun to brag about it because it's not cool.
Yeah, and the same thing for, like, we've talked about academic scholarships. There are lots of different types of scholarships out there. So, like, you have athletic scholarships, which is another one that, a lot of people are very familiar with. You have service scholarships. So you do a lot of community service. You're involved in different clubs, societies, groups. Like, there are scholarships that can go with that. But then you've got other ones like minority scholarships. You've got high need scholarships. You've got creative arts ones. You've got just private scholarships. So, like, you or I could set up a private scholarship fund. We could create a criteria for it and say, all right, I will award $2,000 a year for the person who maybe starts their own business in high school. Like, that would be my personal interest. Maybe I would reward that with a scholarship. These exist, guys, and there's so many of them. There is millions of dollars that go unclaimed every year in scholarships that just didn't get applied for and didn't get granted. So like on top of studying for these tests, you could also just start filling out scholarship applications like it's your job. And some kids spend all summer doing that. Like they will create 3 or 4 generic essays that, you know, maybe talk about their academics, their leadership, their service, maybe their athletics as well. So you got like kind of 4 major essay topics, and then you just start pinging those out to different scholarships and you apply for as many as possible. And if you even
that would be a good plan for someone who's a rising senior.
Yeah.
But the juice is not always worth the squeeze if you are younger than that.
Okay.
In that, the amount of money, like, so my personal journey, my dad climbed telephone poles for a living, and you know, my alma mater cost more than my parents took home a year. And so I needed to find a way to pay for college, or my dad's like, you go to some other place and then transfer and you figure stuff out. So I worked hard on this stuff to try and pay for college. But the fact of the matter is 2/3, so I ended up getting college fully paid for, but it was via a patchwork quilt. 2/3 of it was straight from the school. And then I had to cobble together the rest of it via, you know, Rotary scholarship for $500 here and Eagle Scout scholarship for $2,000. It's a very hard road, an unpredictable road to try and fund a meaningful, like a big chunk of your via those external ones. If you got nothing else going on during the summer, by all means. But the hard work you do in your GPA, SAT, ACT, other stuff the first few years is what lays the foundation for. Because institutional aid, it's just like discounting the price. It's like when they put, you know, when they give a discount on some item at a store, you know, they know what their margins are. Like they can give you a haircut of this much, which to them is, you know, real money. But it's easier for them to do that than for the Rotary to fund, you know, $40,000 for some kid. So the biggest source of income or merit aid rather, will always be from the school itself. So if you can have if that can be your entree of aid from the school itself, and then you can garnish the plate with a bunch of different side dishes of small scholarships, you know, that can work well together. And then of course, you know, one of my favorite college counselor friends, he wrote a book, Michael Zarek, he wrote a book, and one of my favorite quotes is, the best financial aid you can give yourself is graduating in 4 years. Because every parent I know, every single parent I know assumes clearly my kid is going to be part of the very much under 50% of the world that graduates in 4 years. Clearly, everyone thinks that. And you know, students listen to this, go Google national 6-year graduation rate, not 4-year graduation rate, 6-year, and then scare yourself silly and say, I am not going to be a statistic. I am going to bring in some AP credits, bring in some dual enrollment credits, and not be a statistic. Because if you plan it right, you know, 4.5 years should not be unreasonable if you plan it right. If you just float through and don't plan anything, then sure, there's plenty of people who take much longer to graduate.
So let's talk about that for a second. Like, why does that happen? Why, like, we go into college thinking, oh, it's a 4-year process to get a bachelor's degree. Why is it taking 5 or 6 years for people to come out with a degree that should have taken 4?
Occasionally it's because of class availability. Like if you don't plan your classes out right, and a certain class is only offered in the spring semester, but then it conflicts with this other mandatory lab class you have to take. Sometimes there's legitimate reasons, but a lot of times it is, you know, students might major or temporarily major in drinking for a semester and fail some classes that they then don't get any credits for, or they might end up needing to sometimes, and this is a good reason to take a little longer, co-ops are fantastic. And I wish they were mandatory at more schools. Like Northeastern has a co-op, and you know, some others like Babson encourage co-ops. You know, some people take longer because they legitimately had a co-op, where that's super. It's an amazing way to, one, make some money, two, have some cool things to talk about during your job interview because you have real world experience and not everyone does. But that's a good excuse. Most of the excuses that are out there is, you know, people failing some classes, or I mean, I'm a nerd. I'm a planner. What I did, when I knew I wanted to major and get out in 4 years, I brought in some AP credits. But what I also did was I went to Microsoft Excel and just did 8 columns and a bunch of rows. I looked at the mandatory classes for my major and all the other requirements, and I'm like, oh wow, this class is only offered every 3 semesters. Like, and so I made my tentative schedule, which changed. It worked mostly, but having that structure, I realized there wasn't as much wiggle room if I wanted to for sure graduate in 4 years. And so I just mapped out the whole thing. And I would encourage every student, it took me half an hour while I was watching Monday Night Football to just go through my requirements and make it in Excel or Google Docs or whatever, and map out the requirements, because it's those classes that are not offered every semester that can screw you.
Yes. And I would throw in a third reason why some people do take 5 years is going into a 4-year program and not being sure about what you want. So if you haven't put the time in high school to be like, all right, I need to do some like soul searching and to look at myself and kind of figure out, okay, what is it that I want to do for a career? What are my interests? What are my strengths? What are my passions? And if you don't put more than 10 minutes of thought into it, it's very likely you're going to get to your college and then maybe a year in, 2 years in, you're like, you know what, I don't really like this. Like I signed up for something because my friends were doing it. It was like the in vogue thing to do at the time. My parents were like all about wanting to do that, or my girlfriend or boyfriend was doing that. Like all the wrong reasons that people sign up for different things. And then 2 years in, you're like, you know, I don't want to do this. And you change major and half the classes you took are no longer applicable. And you have to kind of add an extra year to finish. So, you know, that would be the other thing you can do in high school is just kind of devote some time to learning more about yourself. What are your interests? What are your strengths? Go do different internships, go shadow people in different jobs, and just start learning about the things that you like, and even more important, what you don't like. Even if you start crossing different careers and paths off your list, that is helpful. You know, it's something that I did. I worked a lot of different part-time jobs. I did some internships, and I started figuring out the jobs that I didn't want to do, and that made picking one to try that little bit easier. Like, so I started college still not exactly sure what I wanted, but I knew what I didn't want, which was helpful.
Sure. And there's another wrinkle to it as well, both when it comes to dual enrollment credits and scholarship eligibility. One of the other FIRE community members, Rocky Lavani, and I talk shop a lot about this stuff. And you need to, when you build your list, you need to see, do they have credit caps? Like, one, do they allow APs? Is there a max amount of AP credits you can bring in? Do they honor dual enrollment? If so, can you pre-vet them on some of the lists? Because some kids, if that's an important component of their graduate early and save money strategy, you need to figure out whether your schools are going to block you from using more than this, or whether they can. I mean, I've heard of students who, because they researched that ahead of time, walked in as sophomore and a half, like 3 semesters in. Other places say, no, you can bring in 12, that's the max. So that's one thing. That's the bringing in credits.
And just before you move on, so you're talking about now while we're in high school and you're looking ahead at your 4 years of high school or your sophomore, whatever, and you're seeing that there are AP classes offered, there are IB, there's dual enrollment classes that your high school offers. And you're saying, all right, we need to check ahead of time if I'm interested. So like I'm in Maryland. So if I wanted to go to University of Maryland, I would get on the phone to their admissions office and be like, I'm interested in taking these dual enrollment AP classes. Will these be accepted for credit at University of Maryland before you even sign up to them? Or you figure out like what colleges would take them.
If you're a rising senior, as you're finalizing your list, or if you're a junior, as you're just starting to think about your list, it's a great time during this downtime we have to do that. Because here's one example. I forget which college it was. One of my favorite students from last year, she found out, luckily it was fine, but she had aced so many AP exams and taken a couple of dual enrollment. And the school that she chose to matriculate at, she found out no matter what, you can only bring in 14 credits, 14 or 15. And so what happened? So she, based on the quality of her AP exam scores and the dual enrollment class she took, if she had been allowed to accept it all, it'd be 29 credits. So they basically said, you can have, like, I think it's 15. And so she had to choose which 15 she wanted. So the classes that were not in her major, that were just elective, whatever's, she did that. And that way she retook, calculus 2, so she could build a good foundation. She was going to be an engineer. And so but they made her choose. Like, she was entitled, but she was capped. So she had done enough work to get 29 credits or so. But so that happens. Now, the other related issue to that is figuring out these scholarships, if they are stackable or not. Because some places they punish industriousness, which is super sad, where a kid writes all these essays, does all this stuff, and if you get merit aid, they can reduce up to dollar for dollar the money that you win. Like, if you had an aid package from them of this and you win a $2,000 scholarship, they'll claw back the whole $2,000, just steal it. Not your package doesn't change at all, and it punishes industry, it punishes hard work, and it's sort of sad. So finding out which schools allow stackable scholarships versus not is super important. Now, the other thing is, some people think they're too rich and they don't bother filling out financial aid forms. Now, why colleges do this is you can just guess or wonder why, but many colleges, they in theory have a bright line between the financial aid department and the admissions department, yet then they'll have a little asterisk at the bottom of their application saying, if you want to be considered for merit aid, you have to fill out your FAFSA or your CSS profile forms. It's like, but it's merit aid, or is it? And so, sometimes you're going to have to fill it. Sometimes families think I'm too rich, I can't qualify, but I'll apply for merit aid, and they won't read the fine print. They won't fill out the FAFSA or the CSS profile forms, and then they won't get any merit aid. And the other thing is, depending on how large your family is, I have some people that I've worked with in Atlanta where they were wealthy, but they also had like a million kids. Like we had 4 kids in college at one time. But I'm a physician, I can't qualify for anything. I'm like, no, you have 4 kids at super expensive schools. Run the numbers. Like, worst case, you'll get a couple bucks. And they were shocked. They texted me like, holy crap, you weren't kidding. Like, I actually qualified, not for a ton, but every little bit helps. So, if you're a millionaire, you're making $1 million a year with 1 kid, then I'm sorry, you're probably not getting anything and that's probably appropriate. But sometimes people with large families don't realize when you have multiple kids overlapping in college, the numbers for financial aid can be rosier than you think, at least during the years they overlap.
Okay. And that's some great advice, something I wouldn't have thought of beforehand as well. Let's go back to the AP dual enrollment IB. I asked you this beforehand, like which one do you think, or is there one that is more valuable than the other? So AP is advanced placement classes. You take the class in high school, you take a test at the end, you get a score from 1 to 5. And if your score is over, usually it's like a 4 or 5, it counts as a college credit. Assume that the college takes that AP score. Dual enrollment, there's a partnership between your high school and a local college or community college, and the teacher is basically offering a college level class at the high school, and you take that and it should count for college credit afterwards. Again, assuming that the college that you apply to accepts that credit. And then IB, I don't know a huge amount about. So if you can talk a little bit more about IB, that would be great, but just kind of what are the benefits of each of the options?
Sure. And in many cases, you don't have a choice. Like there are a lot of schools that are either an IB school or an AP school. Some offer both. Mm-hmm. But IB is a longer term commitment because there's an IB diploma that there's 2 levels, IB diploma, IB certificate that you can come out with. And it's all very dependent. You might get credits someplace, you might not, depending on the level of that you complete. But it very much is Pepsi and Coke in terms of one, kids don't have a choice. Like I go to XYZ high school and they offer APs but not IB. But they're both ways of showing rigor. I care. Like I'm challenging myself with harder classes. There's on level, and then there's IB and AP classes. Now AP is less of a curriculum in terms of you're in it to win it, where you're in this program where there's a diploma that comes out at the end. You could take some AP and then some on level depending on your interests and ability levels and whatnot. The AP tests happen. The IB tests happen at late in high school. So do the AP tests. They happen at the end of the school year and the year that you take them. We just tell people whatever is offered at your school, you want to shine relative to where you're at. So there's a school in town I won't name who they have a little bit of AP inflation where we've tutored 100 plus kids from that high school. I could be on the stand testifying. I do not believe we've ever had one kid who's taken fewer than 10 APs at that particular high school, which is a ton. On the other hand, some schools are paternalistic where they want to protect you from overstressing yourself, where even the valedictorian at the school just 1 mile down the street from the other school cannot have more than 8 by graduation, whereas the other school, like one school having 7, you're a rock star, another school having 10, so what? Like
average, yeah.
It's important for parents and students to figure out like what's a normal number of APs, because if 30 people apply to school X from your high school and everybody else has 10, you have 2, that looks terrible. If everybody else has 5 and you have 7, looks amazing. So you need to understand what's offered, because they're not going to punish you if your school doesn't offer it. There's a kid, which brings me to the other point, online APs. I teach some pro bono boot camps in South Georgia sometimes, and it's a different world out there for sure. Neat stories, hardworking kids. And there's one school where it's not their fault. Like they don't have enough people to offer a lot of different tracks. So they only have one AP English. That's it. And so there's this kid who looked exactly like McLovin from Superbad. And he talked to me at the lunch break during the boot camp. He's like, hey, can I pick your brains some stuff while we're eating? I'm like, sure. And he had availed himself of some of the virtual APs, like online APs that the state of Georgia government offers, and some other, there's a lot of vendors that do it. Some states do it as well. And so it was a way for him to show, I might be in a small town in Georgia where the population is 3,000, but even though there's only one AP at his school, his goal was to walk in with a bunch of credits into where he went to school. And so he had taken 4 or 5 other APs online and done very well, took the test, got good scores in the AP exam. So you might have listeners here that are listening in, small town North Dakota. That doesn't mean that they can't take advantage of them because they're not a big fancy high school. So do look at that.
So it raises a question for me as well, because you said there are some schools that would really push AP, some that maybe can't offer it. So then there's usually a third metric that sometimes comes up. I know when I worked in a college admission, so I was a graduate assistant, I recruited for soccer, and I was very interested in like what the academics were and how it translated to the financial aid offered. Class rank was something that would come up a lot. Is that really important? Like, do colleges look at the school you're coming from and say, like, you only have 3 AP classes, but the school only offered 3. So really you kick butt in your school, but the school down the road, a kid could have 5 and they're average. Like, does that come into play at all?
So class rank is dying. Now, should it? In my opinion, no, but that's neither here nor there. A lot of schools are getting rid of class rank because parents ask them to, and to be fair, it can cause stress, where kids are worrying about my GPA to the 5th decimal point. Am I ahead of Caleb or is he ahead of me? I get that part. But the thing is, you can't hide necessarily in that, and this is a good thing. Most high schools will submit a 2 to 4 page PDF profile of the high school, saying here at Watson High School, we offer 10 APs, here's the math tracking, here's our GPA quintiles or quartiles, not class rank, but just rough grade bands so you understand what does it mean. And then on top of that, they'll have the middle 50% performance for SAT and ACT. Like, those are pretty common on almost all profiles. So we tell parents, like, if you Google or just go onto your high school's website and go into the counseling department, many schools will publish that actual PDF, the same one that goes to colleges, on their website. So if you're a parent wondering, is my son just trying to get out of working hard when he tells me that all his friends only have a 3.6, go look. And because those GPA bands, you can approximate and see roughly where you stand. So that's a good piece of homework for parents to do as early as possible, or students. They just want to know where they stand. Because some students are mad because the whole getting rid of class rank thing is relatively recent at a lot of schools. And so kids who want to know where they stand, where's the rankings, they often can't, but they kind of can if they go look at that profile. But even if a school doesn't publish that on the profile, go back to my earlier example. There's a certain school in town where literally a third of the class at least applies to UNC Chapel Hill. A third. And it's out of state. It's one high school. They can't take a ton of kids from one high school out of state. They have to preserve most of those seats for kids that are in state. So even if that school does not rank and all the kids are like, we won, they don't rank, that's not true. Because what they can do is they can see, okay, of the 35 people from your high school that applied this year, you literally have the 3rd lowest GPA out of those 35. Like, there's no hiding. Like, in the end, your GPA is your GPA. So they can make it a little harder by not putting GPA bands or not class ranking, but there's no hiding. So that's why we tell kids you just work as hard as you can. And the other thing is, it's very popular to talk about grade inflation, but no one is talking about grade compression. Because of policies like those no-zero policies we talked about earlier, grade compression is a thing. There's a high school a couple blocks from our office where they publish the GPA range. If you have an 88.4 or below, you're in the bottom 25% of the class. 88.4, that's a B+. Bottom 25%. If you have a 94.1, you were in the top 25%. That's why parents need to stay on their kids junior year, because if you float downwards or upwards by 2%, you just hopscotch a fifth of the entire student body. Like, no one realizes, like literally half the student body falls in a 6% or less range at that high school. So that's why working hard or slacking off even one semester can do more damage than you think, especially if you are competing like that UNC example where they can't realistically take more than 4 or 5 from that school, but 30 apply for sure.
Yeah, so good to know. So that compression, that the lower end of the scale is moving closer to the top. So yeah, there is just a smaller range of scores for the entire school. So yeah.
An important distinction to make for your listeners is, in a perfect world, I wish that the admissions officers, they're good people, they're ethical people, they're hardworking people, they're underpaid, they're overworked. It's not an enviable job, and they're good people. But there's not always time to really analyze or give weight to the AP exam scores the way they should. For credit, yes. For admission, sometimes no, especially because a lot of kids take their lion's share of their APs senior year, some junior year, but a lot senior year as well. So they might not even have that data to make the decision based on. So the primary value at most schools, for better or for worse, of taking AP classes rather, is the GPA bump. So because of the GPA bump that most schools give you, where they might add 6 or 7 points to your 100-point GPA at some schools, or they might give you like a 4.5 instead of 4 for an A and an AP class. Like, it depends whether you're the 4-point scale or the 100-point scale. That is honestly better. And for better or for worse, I tell students, I'd rather see you get 107% because you got 100 in an AP class and get a 3 on the AP exam than get a 94 with those extra points, but get a 4. Like, in the end, where your bread is buttered is that GPA, which feeds into class rank, which feeds into all that. So some students think all that matters at the end of the year is the AP exam, which it does for credit, but it doesn't necessarily from an admissions standpoint.
Yeah, so credit is valuable. Like, a credit at a private college, like, could be worth, a couple hundred, a couple thousand. But certainly, the merit-based aid that could come from that higher GPA over 4 years could be worth a lot more. So if you're going for dollars and cents, like, they're both going to have a dollar value, but GPA sounds like it could have a higher financial weight in a lot of cases.
Right. And one thing, it's a good blog. It's a good podcast. But if people Google the reality of grade inflation, first link on Google pops right up. I was on a podcast where there's a full length topic about that, because sometimes students or parents don't understand the gravity. And the funny part is, I wasn't being mean. I used a case study of a certain high school, the same school that I did on my Choose FI episode way back a year ago. And they stopped class ranking because they started getting all these journalists calling saying, we've heard about your legendary grade inflation. Like people from Topeka calling the high school in Atlanta. But we gave some real raw numbers there, and just seeing how much it's grown. At that high school, if you had a 4.21, you weren't even the top 10%. And so a parent might check in, hey, Caleb, how's it going? I have a 3.7. Well, at that high school, that means you're in the bottom half. And so it just depends on how much inflation or deflation your school has. But the pressure on teachers, in the area you're in, think how much pressure there is on that mom coming in begging you to round that 89.3% up to an A, and like there's all that kind of jockeying, and it's a mess. So school teachers have it hard, high school guidance counselors have it hard, admissions officers have a lot of work on their plate. It's there's a lot of hard work in this industry, and it's a lot of nuance that parents might not know or students might not know.
Yeah, and just kind of going back to that as well, there's a popular saying that I heard once as a soccer coach, and it was like, the players win the game, the coach loses the game, the referee screws up the game. Like, if you are relying on the referee, so in our case, the teacher, the guidance counselor, the admissions office, to round like an 89 or whatever up, like you're relying on somebody else. You're letting an external locus of control happen there. Like, if you have it in your power to maximize that GPA and you chose not to do it, like, you're leaving it up to fate. And the thing you are in full control of is how much you work. Like, nobody can outwork you. So your work rate, your effort is something you're in full control of. And that's something I hope you're taking away from this conversation, that it's got to start pretty early and you got to be in full control over your own grades. Because it does end up, being very valuable to you in the end in terms of, your GPA, the dollar saved when you go to college, all of that kind of fun stuff. All right, Brian, go on ahead.
I did want to point out one small thing. And this is the kind of thing where if you're going to do this or make this decision, find someone you admire who's 1 or 2 years older than you, who knows what they're talking about academically, just a high achiever, 1 or 2 years older. It is the case, at least in our area and in most of the areas of the tutors that I talk shop with regularly, that many schools, and they give non-answers on websites when they say, do you prefer AP versus dual enrollment? At least here, dual enrollment classes, your competition is not super fierce at the local school down the street, where like all the high schoolers have the best grades in the class because they blow it out of the water and don't have to try very hard. Whereas the AP history class on their campus, you'll have certain kids choose to go take History 101 dual enrollment because they can not try again A+, no problem. And then, or they would stay on campus, work their tail off for English. A lot of admissions officers are not dumb, and because admissions officers are often assigned to a certain region for a number of years, they get to know, like, Phelan High School, what's that school about? Like, oh yeah, it's a really hard school, or and they might know that AP classes on many campuses are harder than the dual enrollment. So if a kid has a choice between the two, if they're applying to tip top, top 25 ranked schools, the AP, if they can handle it and do well in it, is probably going to look better. On the other hand, if you're just going to a relatively easy to get into school and want to make sure that credit transfers, where you can make a phone call and say, will you accept this college's credits from dual enrollment? So it really depends on the caliber of your list, and it's nuanced for sure. But that's what we see. So we see a lot of kids who are like, you know what, the highest ranking school on my list is LSU. They already said they'll accept this. My score is already higher than their average for the ACT. No problem. Yes, don't worry about the AP. You can just go down the street, lock in that credit. But a kid who's like, they're looking at me to go play soccer at Northwestern, that might be a different decision.
Okay. Final question I have for you. There's another type of test called a CLEP test. Mm-hmm. And actually, I don't know what the CLEP stands for either. Do you?
Yeah, it's CLEP. It's just for college level examination placement. It's basically, it's not a competitor, but it's a school. You can take the tests, and you don't necessarily have to have taken it's run by the College Board, which is the people that run the APs and the SAT and SAT subject tests and all that. But I would tell anybody, before you waste time thinking about it, you want to go and look and browse the list of the different credit granting programs they have and see which colleges will accept it, which ones won't. There's over 30 of the exams.
And essentially, it's just like you can say, I want to study on my own, take this test in this particular subject, and it will count as a college credit in some colleges. So like basically you don't have to take the class. You can kind of do this on your own, take a test and say, okay, I clearly know enough that I shouldn't have to take this class when I go to college. So the college accepts it as a credit, and off you go.
And if you can do well on them, it's like an AP exam. An AP exam is under $100. A CLEP exam is under $100. Given that most of those classes you get credit for are at least 3 credits, nowhere is a class under $100 for 3 credits, or even $100 for 1 credit. So that is definitely money savings if you can pull that off. I would say it's less commonly accepted than AP, dual enrollment, other things. So definitely check and print in PDF and save a hard copy with proof, just because it's not as nearly as accepted as other places.
Awesome. All right, Brian, any other kind of final advice for kids in high school thinking about college before we wrap up today?
Yeah, so most of what we talked about today have been very numerical. So GPA, SAT, ACT, number of APs, very numerical. That is what's going to get your application read. But once your application is read, there better be something there. My biggest fear, I had a student admit to me during this COVID times that there's this show called Friends. I binged all 10 seasons of Friends in the last month, and I'm like doing the math. I'm like, oh, dude, come on! Like, he needs to be working on his college application essays, or doing something. He can get out and enjoy the fresh air. But because there's less going on right now, I worry that some people are not going to either work on their essays and then be stressed out senior year if they're a rising senior, or just getting involved in things. I'll give you one example to close with. One of my favorite students, teacher Trump's most of my favorite students, we all have favorite students. This kid is so cool, and he's so upbeat, it's almost infectious, where he's like, well, my grandpa always says, get on living or get on dying. And so I'm going to take advantage of this. He wants to be Mark Zuckerberg meets Elon Musk, like combined. And so he wants to go to Georgia Tech. His stats are honestly a little too low to compete traditionally for Georgia Tech. But he said, you know what, I'm going to keep working on my ACT, trying to super score, I'm going to get a good GPA this coming fall semester. And he signed up for Coursera and TEDx and some other stuff on data science, Python, all this stuff. But he enjoys it. He's not doing it to try and look good. He loves the nerdy where business meets engineering type stuff. And like, he'll have the credential. He has a LinkedIn account. He can put the LinkedIn, like, I passed this Coursera exam. Here's my certificate number. Like, he's going to have that. And it's not even that that course might be that hard. He had the follow through. Like, when everybody else is playing League of Legends 24 hours a day, like, he's like, no, I want to make use of this downtime and do some cool stuff. Like, you don't have to kill yourself. I mean, he's still probably playing plenty of video games, but he's doing that, X hours a week, and he's really learning stuff, and his dad's proud of him, and I'm proud of him. And so that is the kind of thing where, even though a lot of the traditional summer camp and whatnot opportunities are gone, depending on what your students' interests are, there's neat things they could do. Or my next door neighbor started a power washing business and is trying to save up money for college. Like, so it doesn't have to be Coursera, just doing something neat with your time, especially since there's not a lot going on.
Yeah, adding to your own talent stack, your own resume. Like, so doing something interesting, taking part in some cool activities, volunteering your time is another great one you can do, especially with all this downtime. Like, is there a cause that you feel really passionate about that you'd like to get involved in. Brian just mentioned starting a business. So like if your part-time job disappeared over the summer because, COVID kind of shut down a lot of these smaller businesses, go start your own business. Something you can definitely do. That's great advice. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to help.
If anyone wants to kind of learn more about what you're doing, Edison Prep, reach out, anything like that, do you have any contact details we can use?
Yeah, sure. It's edisonprep.com, Edison like Thomas Edison, prep.com. And we are in Atlanta physically, but we've obviously now and for the next while we'll be doing plenty of stuff online, whether it be SAT, ACT stuff. We do light college planning as well. So it just depends. Happy to chat with people. And one of the people from Choose FI who lives in Michigan emailed me this morning and he had 2 mock tests that he'd taken, and he thought he wanted to see whether he should do SAT versus ACT. So we're always happy to help that way. A lot of the listeners have emailed us.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Happy to help.